Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I never thought my marriage would fall apart like this. Nicole and I had been together for 9 years, and we had a 7-year-old son, Ethan. I was 38, she was 36. We had built a stable life, at least I thought we had. I worked in IT, handling corporate security systems. It was a stressful job, long hours, constant troubleshooting, and sometimes I had to work late into the night. Nicole, on the other hand, wasn't working full-time. She picked up part-time jobs now and then, but most of the time she stayed home with Ethan. I never minded. My income was enough to support us, and she never had to worry about bills or how food would make it onto the table. And then, somewhere along the way, she started resenting me for not being the same. At first, it was just small things. I'd come home after a 10-hour shift, exhausted, and she'd barely look up from her phone. When I kissed her on the cheek, she'd shrug it off like it meant nothing. Conversations became shorter, colder. One night I found her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, but I could tell she wasn't really watching it. "I don't feel loved anymore," she said finally. "You don't look at me the way you used to." I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Nicole, I'm exhausted. Work is draining, and when I come home I still try to help with Ethan." "But you don't give me any attention," she shot back. "You don't ask me how my day was. You don't even hug me when you walk through the door." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I was trying, that I was doing everything I could, but instead, I just ran a hand over my face. "I don't want to fight." "That's the problem." Her voice rose, frustration boiling over. "You never want to talk about it." That was the beginning of the silent treatment. Days turned into weeks. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was short and cold. 3 weeks passed and neither of us made a move to fix things. The silence had settled between us like a thick fog, and honestly, I was tired of it. Then one evening Nicole packed a bag. "I'm going to Lisa's for a while," she said, barely meeting my eyes. Lisa, her sister, lived in the city next to ours. I could have asked why. I could have told her to stay, to work things out, but instead, I just nodded. "All right." She seemed almost surprised that I didn't argue. Maybe she had been expecting a fight. Instead, she just gave me a short goodbye, kissed Ethan on the forehead, and walked out the door. At first, I felt relief. No tension, no awkward conversations, just peace. But after a few days, the quiet started to get to me. I found myself thinking about her, missing her, wondering if I had been too distant. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention. One night my phone buzzed. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I don't know what there is to say." She left me on read. When she came back, something had changed. At first I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but then the signs became clearer. She started dressing differently. Tighter jeans, low-cut tops, makeup even when she was just running out for milk. She started going out more. First, she said she was visiting Lisa again. Then it was a girls' night out. The first time she stayed out late, she walked through the door at 2 a.m., looking way too put together for someone who had just been hanging out. The next time, it was 4 a.m. Then, one night, she didn't come home at all. By the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, I was still sitting in the living room, waiting. I wasn't even angry, just numb. At 6 a.m., the front door finally creaked open. Nicole walked in, tossing her purse onto the table like nothing was wrong. She reeked of cheap perfume and alcohol. I stood up, arms crossed. "Where the hell were you?" She barely looked at me. "Relax. I was at Lisa's. We lost track of time." I stared at her, letting the silence drag out. I didn't believe her. I wanted to, but something inside me knew she was lying. I tried to ignore the feeling in my gut, told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I was just insecure because of how distant things had been between us. But then one night I decided to check. She had told me she was going to a friend's birthday dinner at some new restaurant. I didn't ask many questions, just nodded as she walked out the door in a tight dress and heels, the kind of effort she hadn't made for me in a long time. A few hours passed. I sat at home staring at the TV but not really watching it. Something about the way she had left, the way she had been acting lately. It didn't sit right with me. I grabbed my keys and decided to drive by the restaurant. When I got there, the place was half empty. A few couples lingered at tables, chatting quietly, but there was no big group, no sign of any celebration. I pulled out my phone and called her. "Hey, where are you? I thought I'd come by and say hi." There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Then she cleared her throat. We decided to go somewhere else. I'll text you the address." I waited and waited. The text never came. That was the moment I knew. The next day, while she was in the shower, I grabbed her car keys, slipped outside, and placed a tracker under the driver's seat. A small device, barely noticeable, something I had ordered online months ago when I thought I might use it for work security. Now, I was using it on my wife. I felt sick. A few nights later, she said she was going out with some friends and might be home late. I nodded, not saying much. She walked over to Ethan's room, leaned down, and kissed his forehead while he slept. Then she grabbed her purse and left, acting like everything was normal. But it wasn't. As soon as she was gone, I pulled up the tracker on my phone. She wasn't at a bar. She wasn't at a friend's house. She was at a motel. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to process it, trying to tell myself that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation. But I already knew there wasn't. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and drove. When I got there, I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I could see her car parked in front of one of the rooms. The lights were on inside. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Nicole stepped out, adjusting her dress, running a hand through her hair. And right behind her, a man walked out. Tall, dark hair, smiling as he said something to her, something that made her laugh. And just like that, every last bit of doubt disappeared. She had been lying to me all along. I got out of my car, my hands clenched into fists, my blood boiling so hot I could barely think straight. "Nicole!" She turned sharply, eyes wide with shock. The guy next to her froze, caught like a deer in headlights. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them together. My hands were shaking, but I made sure to get a clear shot. "Who the hell is this?" My voice came out sharp, cutting through the cool night air. Nicole's face flushed red. "Roger, please, let's talk about this." I ignored her and turned my attention to the man standing beside her. He looked familiar, and as I studied him, something clicked. I knew him. My stomach twisted. He was her personal trainer. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You've got to be kidding me." He took a step back, raising his hands defensively. "Hey man, I cut him off. "Shut up." Before he could say another word, I grabbed him by the front of his shirt and shoved him backward, forcing him to stumble a few steps away. "Get the hell out of here," I growled. "And don't think for a second you're walking away from this clean. I'll make sure your boss gets these pictures in his hands." His face went pale. He opened his mouth to argue but froze. Then, without a word, he turned and ran. Nicole grabbed my arm, her grip tight, desperate. "Please don't do this here." I yanked away from her, the betrayal in my chest heavier than anything I had ever felt before. "You don't get to tell me what to do. You had a choice, Nicole, and you chose this. We're done." Her eyes filled with panic. "Roger, please don't do this. Don't ruin my life." I didn't even look at her. I just turned around and walked away. I barely felt the drive away from the motel, gripping the steering wheel tightly, my heart still pounding from what I had just seen. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I just drove. No destination, no plan. Just the road and my thoughts. The anger, the betrayal, the sheer disbelief of it all. It swirled inside me like a storm I couldn't escape. I pulled into an empty parking lot, my hands clenched into fists, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face? I had spent years building a life with her, a home, a family, and she threw it all away for him. After a while, the adrenaline started to wear off. I turned the car around and drove home. When I walked inside, Nicole was waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, hands clenched together in her lap, eyes red and swollen. She had been crying. "Good. I know you're mad, but can we talk?" Her voice was quiet, careful. I dropped my keys onto the table and exhaled. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumbled. Tears filled her eyes instantly, but I didn't care. "Roger, please, we have a son. And you didn't think about him when you were sneaking around?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She had no defense, no excuse that would undo what she had done. Then finally she broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed, shoulders shaking. I didn't care. I packed her bags and set them by the door. "You need to leave," I said, voice steady, final. She looked at me, panicked. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Not my problem." I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Nicole walking out of that motel room. The way she laughed at whatever he had said. The way her face dropped when she saw me. By the time the sun came up, I was already dressed and out the door. When I stormed into his gym, the manager barely had time to look up before I was dropping my phone onto his desk, screen lit up with the photos I had taken. "You have a great trainer here," I said, my voice calm in a way that made it clear I wasn't here for excuses. "Not only is he training my wife, but he's also screwing around with her." The manager's face darkened as he swiped through the pictures. "That's completely unprofessional," he muttered. "We'll handle it." And they did. By the end of the day, the trainer was fired. I almost wished I could have seen his face when he got the call. Almost. As for Nicole, losing her lover was just the beginning. With nowhere else to go, she turned to Lisa for help. Lisa let her crash on her couch for 2 weeks before kicking her out. Even she was disgusted. Said she couldn't believe Nicole had destroyed her marriage like that. Then she tried moving in with some of her friends, but that didn't last either. Apparently nobody wants to support a cheater when the truth comes out. Meanwhile, I filed for sole custody of Ethan. The judge barely even hesitated. One look at the situation, at the evidence, and I was granted full custody. Nicole sat in that courtroom silent. She knew she had lost. She didn't get a single thing from the divorce. The house had always been mine, bought long before we got married. And I had made sure to protect my finances, keeping everything separate. She walked away with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. Nicole had always lived comfortably. She never had to worry about bills, or how food would make it onto the table. That was my job. But not anymore. With nowhere to go and no one willing to take her in, she was forced to rent a tiny, run-down apartment in a part of town she would have never even considered before. She found a new job as a cashier at a grocery store. It wasn't much, but it was all she could get. Every time she got paid, most of it went straight to rent, leaving her barely enough to scrape by. One night my phone buzzed with a text. "I'm sorry. I messed up." I stared at the screen for a long time, then deleted it. No reply. No reaction. Just gone. Months passed. I moved on, focused on Ethan, and built a life that no longer included her. Nicole, on the other hand, was stuck in survival mode. She bounced from job to job, never staying in one place for long. Either she quit because she hated it, or she got fired for showing up late. Without a safety net, every mistake cost her something: money, stability, dignity. Then one day I ran into her. I had just come out of a store balancing a couple of bags as Ethan climbed into the back seat of the car. He giggled, tapping his toy car against the door, completely unaware of the moment that was about to unfold. As I closed the door and turned to get into the driver's seat, I saw her. Nicole. She stood a short distance away, clutching her purse, staring at the ground. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, looking like she wasn't sure if she wanted to be there or just wanted to disappear altogether. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Clothes that hung on her thinner frame like she had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her gaze drifted to Ethan through the car window, watching him as he babbled to himself, his hands gripping his toy. "Does he ask about me?" Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I nodded. "Sometimes." She swallowed hard, blinking quickly like she was trying to keep it together. "I really screwed up, didn't I?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I just got into the car and left. Because she already knew. Thank you for watching.